Hi everyone, welcome to today's online talk with Julie Merriman. My name is Chris Clark, I'm Senior Curator here at the Glucksman. And this is a series of talks which accompanies the Glucksman's current 2021 exhibition, Home, Being and Belonging, Contemporary Ireland, and invites participating artists to discuss their practices, exhibited works, and recent projects. And these talks have been and will continue to take place throughout the duration of Home until the end of October. Julie Merriman is a Dublin-based artist whose work examines the history of mark making, the context of drawn, written, and programmed language. Using present-day and historical data as research material, she investigates modes of inscription, replication, and transmission. And her artwork has been featured in exhibitions at DLR Lexicon Gallery in Dublin, Dublin City Gallery, the U Lane, EVA International in 2018 in Limerick City Gallery, Tolka Festival of Visual Art Galway, and Lewin Gallery in Athlone. And she's the recipient of the Grange Gorman Public Art Commission, the DLR Lexicon Municipal Gallery Visual Arts Commission Award 2018, and Fort Camden Commission from Cork County Council. For those of you who aren't familiar with the format, we have pre-recorded, or Julie has pre-recorded a presentation on her practice and some of her recent projects, which will be streamed for the next approximately 25 minutes. And then we're going to link up back here with Julie afterwards for discussion and Q&A. And of course, you can pose your questions using the chat function or the Q&A function. And please keep in mind that these talks and conversations will be available to view on the Glucksman YouTube channel afterwards. So without further ado, pleased to stream a presentation by artist Julie Merriman.
My name is Julie Merriman. I'm a visual artist. I live in Dublin. So in this presentation, I'm going to give an overview of my work and interests to date. I'm going to start with an older series of drawings, Building to be Demolished, as this is pertinent to the exhibition Home, Being and Belonging in Contemporary Ireland, as it references my ongoing interest in the built environment. I will conclude with my two most recent projects, work made for the Markievicz Award 2020 and Ports Past and Present 2020 to 2022. So my work examines the history of mark making in the context of drawn, written and programmed language. Using present day and historical data as research material, I investigate modes of inscription, replication and transmission. Drawing is a tactile media, predominantly of the hands. I employ obsolete office copying materials in making my work, carbon paper and typewriter film. The binary nature of much of the work is the result of following the logic of these materials. It explores the relation between the original and its copy, sharing characteristics and appearances with print. In order to develop this connection further, I have begun exploring stencil duplication, exploring and adapting manual and mechanical mimeograph stencil duplicators, both Gestetner and Riso in my practice. As a result, print is now an active medium in my work, both as a component of the large-scale drawings and also in the context of book art, which I see as a space of exhibition, a way to disseminate, promote and distribute artwork. The first group of drawings I'm going to show you is Building to be Demolished, 2002-2005. I worked on these, and they examined the demolition and regeneration of three iconic housing areas in Dublin: Fatima Mansions in Rialto, St Michael's Estate in Inchicore, and the Ballymun Towers in Ballymun. The drawing shows the building before and during demolition and the subsequent redevelopment of the sites. I'm just going to concentrate on the drawings for Fatima Mansion here. So this is dislocation block G in Fatima Mansion in October 03. And then this slide shows block G in November 03, when it was a pile of rubble. And this is construction on the site of block G, which happened the subsequent year, 2004. So in 2006, I began another project, the Carlisle Pier Residency. This was a long-term project. The Carlisle Pier was built in 1850 in Dún Laoghaire, and it was a main point of departure and emigration from Ireland. The building was demolished in 2009, and I'm very sad to say that the site is now being used as a car park. So this project examined the history of the site and its social, political and psychological links to immigration. This is the first drawing I made about this building and its distortion, Building to be Demolished, Carlisle Pier. This drawing, it contains a memory for me as well as being a drawing of the site. In the 1980s, I was studying in London and I had returned from Holyhead to Dún Laoghaire on the ferry, and I was in a phone box. It was lashing with rain and there was raindrops on the phone box, and I was looking back at the pier. I was ringing for someone to come and collect me, but I remember that moment, and it's recorded in this drawing here. This is a drawing, this is the old terminal building, and the trains actually took the passengers right up very close to the ferry. In this drawing, Bringing Them Eggshells, I was trying to address the amount of people who immigrated from this site. And immigration on the Carlisle Pier took place over numerous years and right up until the 1980s. And this is called Bringing Them Eggshells. This drawing is Ship 2. While I was working on this project, I became very interested in the ships that had left from the Carlisle Pier. And I became interested in ships in general, in naval architecture and naval engineering. And this drawing is, I became interested in the idea of a ship sinking and its journey from the top, from the top of the surface of the sea down to the bottom of the sea. At the same time, around this time, I went to Bristol. This is a photograph of Zambard Kingdom Brunel's SS Great Britain ship being brought back to Bristol after being raised from the bottom of the seabed in the Falklands in 1970. And they restored it, and it's now a major tourist attraction. But it was a very significant ship, and I really wanted to have a look at it. In 2010, I had an exhibition called Measured Fall in Occupy Space in Limerick, curated by Annette Maloney. And again, this exhibition drew on naval architecture and engineering and investigated what happened to a ship as it sinks, as it goes beneath the surface of the water. And this first drawing here, Ship 6, and this was made on carbon paper. The black surface is carbon paper, and then it was the medium used to make the drawing was white carbon paper. In this exhibition, I also had drawings that looked at blueprints of the making of ships, so their engineering aspect of them. And this drawing is called Disruption Rolandworth 5, and it's carbon on canvas. And the Rolandworth reference a shipyard in Germany where the plans I were looking at, it's where the ships had been made. And this is Rolandsworth 4. I put this slide in because it shows there was a group of young people in the gallery, and they went right over to the drawings and they went up very close to them, and they were reading the imagery. And I think that's really important. Well, I always do it with drawings, but I find it important for my work that you can look at the work from a distance, but it's also important to come up and read the imagery. This is an installation view of that exhibition, showing another of the drawings. In 2011, I had an exhibition in the Mermaid Art Centre in Wicklow. It was curated by Clean Shaffrey and Ailish Lavelle, called General Arrangement. And this brought together my work with an installation by Belgian artist Marcel Broodhurst, and it was his work, A Voyage on the North Sea. And this image shows Marcel Broodhurst's work in the exhibition. And at the time, Mermaid had installed a gallery within the gallery space. It was a wooden construction. It was in place for about a year, and it was very fortuitous that I got to show my work at this time, because when you walked around this space, you could hear the wood creaking. There was a smell of wood, and it felt very ship-like. This is one of my drawings in the exhibition, and this is Ship 12, and it's carbon on masking paper. And in making this drawing, I had laid pieces of masking tape across a big sheet of carbon paper. I had drawn upon it, then I pulled the masking tape back off, and I re-adhered them to another drawing surface to make this drawing here. This is Ship 1, and this is typewriter ribbon on paper. This was the first drawing where I unspooled pieces of typewriter film from a canister, and I pinned them across the drawing surface and drew on top of them. Then in 2016, I had an exhibition called Revisions in Dublin City Gallery, the Hugh Lane, curated by Rory O'Keefe. So Revisions was the culmination of a year-long engagement with Dublin City Council, part of the public art programme Interaction with the City. So working in the council, I engaged with staff in housing, architectural and engineering departments who draw or read drawings as part of their everyday work. I looked at plans for numerous projects in DCC's extensive archive of drawing that map the development of the city over a 100-year period, and they really have an amazing collection of drawings. It was a real privilege to get a chance to look at them and to work with them. I made site visits to contemporary projects in progress at the time, such as the construction of the Rosie Hackett Bridge, 2014, and to Dolphin House, Rialto, where an extensive redevelopment programme was in the planning stages. I had conversations with staff around the role of drawing within the City Council and how this had changed and developed over the years. The work in this exhibition examined the inherent visual complexity and knowledge conveyed through this large repository of drawing plans that are key to the development and construction of much of Dublin City's infrastructure. So this is a photograph of the Rosie Hackett Bridge under construction in 2013. And this was, I was interested in this project. I had a site visit. It was actually very narrow when we were actually on the bridge itself, when it was being constructed. I spoke with the engineer on the site, and I also spoke then back with the engineers back in the offices in Dublin City Council about the bridge. This is another of the Rosie Hackett Bridge under construction photographs. So then I made work myself in response to those to the site. So this is Construction 1 Bridge, carbon on canvas. And in this drawing, I was really looking more at the plans for the bridge. And this is another drawing of the bridge, and this was looking at the actual site. And this is Construction 2 Bridge, carbon on canvas. This is an installation view of Revisions in Dublin City Gallery, the Hugh Lane, in 2016. And on the right, you can see one of the bridge drawings. This drawing is, this image shows, again, it's an installation view of Revisions, but it shows 3 drawings called housing. These were all housing area. And this was a group of drawings I started around 2015. And I was looking at various housing, various buildings really, and I was wondering how they could be repurposed for housing. And I didn't actually put the site on. When I would show these drawings, I didn't say where they were. I just called them housing area. It's kind of a question mark. Could they possibly be used for housing? And this is just a studio view of work in progress, and it kind of shows how I was making these drawings. I was pinning a typewriter film across the drawings, which would give me the first drawing, which was a positive image. And then I would take the typewriter ribbon strips and I would pin them back over another piece of paper. I would draw over them with pencil, which would push the negative image back onto the page. So that's the dual aspect of working with these materials. So this is, in 2015, I started this series called Housing Area, but I also started another series at the same time called Compiler. And these 2 drawing series look at 2 areas of, 2 of my areas that I'm really interested in, architecture and engineering. The Compiler drawings look at engineering projects. So this is Housing Area 8, and this is typewriter, carbon film, and carbon on paper. And this was this is a photograph installed in EVA International 2018 in Limerick City Gallery. This is the first Compiler drawing I made. And the Compiler drawings, the imagery in these drawings is based on research. As I said, I began in 2015 into early engineering practices from about 1860 to 1910. And in these, I was examining innovative projects of that time, large-scale, mechanical and heavily industrial undertakings. And I was trying to convey that in these drawings, that mechanical industrial nature of the projects that engineering was involved in at the time. I mean, the practice of engineering has evolved and changed rapidly, obviously, in recent decades, and it's still an area that I continue to be interested in, and that's compiler 3. So it brings me on to, this is one of the drawings that is in home in the exhibition in the Glucksman. This is housing area 10, and it's typewriter carbon film on paper. And this is an installation view of home, being and belonging in contemporary Ireland, with the the left is housing area 9, and on the right housing area 10. I'm going to talk a little bit now about mimeograph and Gestetner duplicators. So this is an area that I've started. These are things I've started using in my practice, and that I'm really interested in using and continue to use. So a brief history of mimeograph. The term mimeograph is a ubiquitous term referencing both duplicator and copy. It's also used as a verb, as in mimeographing. In the late 19th century, people laboriously transcribed documents by hand. In 1881, David Gestetner established the Cyclograph Company, creating the first Gestetner mimeograph duplicators. He invented the cyclostyle, a pen with a small, sharp-toothed rotating wheel at its tip, and the Gestetner stencil, a floppy wax sheet backed by carbon paper and card, bound together at the top. Text and images were drawn or written by hand using the cyclostyle pen, and later on they were typed on the stencils. Ink was pushed through the perforations onto a blank sheet of paper, creating an imprint of whatever was inscribed on the stencil. It was the first office printing machine that made exact copies of the same document, effectively and, most importantly, inexpensively. In Europe and America, mimeograph reached its moment of greatest prominence amongst countercultural groups when it was already in decline as a business tool. By 1960, the photocopier had begun to supplant it in the office environment. And this is when the small press print movement of the 1960s and early 1970s, experimental poets and writers of this period turned to the low-cost egalitarian mimeograph, sparking an explosion of underground do-it-yourself magazines and poetry books. So this slide shows some of Gestetner's mimeograph ads, and they had great ads out to promote their products. The one on the left shows the Gestetner 366 model, and they've printed it in three or four different colors, because they made the ink, they made the stencils, they made the tools, they made everything that was needed for the duplicators they produced. So this slide here shows some of my duplicators, my Gestetners. The one on the left is the Neo-Cyclostyle from 1890. It's one of Gestetner's first duplicators. I have a number of these, and I'm very fond of them. I really like the copy that they produce. And then on the right is the models, the 360 from about 1950, 60 this model is. And with this, you can either see there's a handle there at the side, and you can turn the handle so you can use it manually, or you can plug it in and it'll work by, obviously, by electricity. But the stencil is attached to the drum. Then you turn the handle and it'll pull the paper through, and that's how it makes the image. This is a slide shows some of the pens that I have. I mentioned the toothed wheel that was developed, but he also developed loads of other different type of nibs, like with different sharp points and thicker points, depending on what kind of mark you want to make. There was also plates with texture on them that you could put underneath the stencil. In the stencil that I've shown there on the right of the picture, if you put the texture plate underneath the wax stencil, put the wax out on top and rub over it, so you'd get a texture surface for your image. So this is just a studio shot of some Gestetner wax stencils drying on my floor. This is a book I'd been making, and then when they're dry you can stack them, and then you can reprint them again when you want. This image shows a Gestetner head office news that Gestetner produced for about a period of 12 years. They produced a copy of this every year. It's a lovely publication, and this picture here on the screen is from a museum where I took a photograph of it. But I actually have one of these copies of this book myself. And when I started making books myself, I really looked at how did they compile that? How did they make the book? How did they put it together? And how did they fasten it? And I have, in making my own books, this is one of the first books I made. I compiled my book in the exact same way as the Gestetner head office news was done, the same method of holding it together. So this is, as I said, one of the first books I made. It's housing area. And so as I'd been making this series of drawings, and when I discovered the mimeograph and this way of making books, I made a book on the same theme. In 2018, I received the DLR Visual Art Commission Award, and I made this exhibition called Carriage Return, which was shown in the DLR Lexicon Municipal Gallery in 2018. And it explores the interface between the language of drawing and other written and programmed languages currently used in Dún Laoghaire Down. And in a wide consultation process, people in the county gave me samples of the many types of languages they use in various formats. So handwritten or email prose, notes, lists, computer codes, poems, and news articles. So each language I considered as an arrangement of marks and lines, examining the complexity and beauty of new and established patterns of communication in the county. The transcription was did mask the legibility of the original, but I strived to maintain the rhythm of the marks and the pattern of the lines. And this is Carriage Return installation view in the Lexicon Gallery. This is one of the drawings. This is called Urdu 1 and 2. This was a piece of Urdu text that a woman in the county had given me and permission to use in the exhibition. This is a drawing. This is wind cowl 2. On top of the Lexicon building, there's 6 wind cowls that regulate the temperature in the building. So it's a really clever piece of engineering. And I wanted to make something, put something in the exhibition that referenced the building. And I often do that when I'm making an exhibition. And this was what I focused on in this one. This drawing here is called Harmonics, and it's a mimeograph series. And these are, they're all mimeographs, and these are the information that the public had given me, different pieces of text, different forms of communicating, and I made it into this series of drawings. And this is just a detail of that. So, yeah. So then I've put in 2 images here, which are kind of my drawn response to the COVID-19 situation. This is the first, this is called Cut and Paste 1 and 2. They're mimeograph collages, and these were in Home from Home. Irish artists respond to COVID-19 restrictions in the Glucksman, Cork, an online exhibition. And in this, I had started, when COVID kind of happened, everything was kind of closed down and so quiet, and I just started cutting different images up and putting them together, cutting and pasting, and I came up with these 2 images, and they kind of felt how I felt about the situation, and that's how they came about. And then I also made this book called Earthbound. Now at this time I've always been interested in aviation, and I've always wanted to work with aeronautical engineering, and I made this book. This book looked at the problem that the aviation industry had in the fact that they hadn't got parking space for all of the planes when they all became grounded in March 2020. They're mostly airplanes are designed to be in the air and not on the ground, and I was fascinated by how the aviation industry responded to this, and I made this book called Earthbound in response. And this was shown in Dublin Art Book Fair 2020, Design as an Attitude in Temple Bar Gallery and Studios. Then in 2020, I received the Markievicz Award, and this was to work with Irish aviation authorities and aviation research advisors. And in this project, I examined the role and the representation of Irish women in the aeronautical industry during the decade of centenaries, 2012, 2023 and beyond. I wanted to give a visual, nuanced shape to the aeronautical experience of these women, and I produced 2 new bodies of work, a series of mimeograph artist books and large-scale composite drawings on paper and canvas. As part of this project, and this is actually, I'm still working on this, I am also looking at the role of women in aviation today, where only 5 to 10% of pilots flying are currently female. At present, I'm working with the Aer Lingus female pilot and her experience of flying the Airbus A330 from San Francisco to Dublin. So this slide is about Lady Mary Heath. She was born in Limerick in 1896 and she died in 1939. But she went on to become the first person to fly solo across Africa, from South Africa to London. She undertook the journey in an open air cockpit. And for a short period in the late 1920s, she was one of the most famous aviators in the world. And these drawings are, Lady Mary Heath had a de Havilland Gypsy Moth DH-60 aeroplane. And these drawings show various engineering aspects of that plane. And then in 1934, she registered the it's the next drawing. She registered the EIAAW with the Irish Civil Aircraft Register, and she registered the EIABE in 1935. And so these drawings are, that's what they're about. That one. Then during this project, I also looked at the engineering aspect of early aviation, and this is a series of 3 drawings. This is just one of them. It's called Fatigue 3, and in this series I was looking at early lab experience carried out by aeronautical engineers from metal fatigue in airplanes, and this is carbon and mimeograph on paper. So one of the other aviators I was really interested in was Lillian Bland. Lillian Bland was a really interesting woman. She was born in 1878 and she died in 1971, and she was an aeronautical engineer and the first woman in Ireland to fly a powered aircraft. Arguably, she is also the first woman in the world to design, build and fly an aeroplane. This book here, Started Making Aeroplane, examines Lillian Bland's aviation notebook of 1909, which chronicles the design and build of her biplane, the Mayfly. And in this book, I was so interested in and looking at her ability to permeate even the most innocuous marks with her ambition for flight. And this is Started Making Airplane 2. I made 2 books about this. And just the very title of the book, Started Making Airplanes, that was one of the chapter headings in her notebook. It's an amazing notebook, and I was really privileged to actually get to work with it. So this is a drawing called Started Making Airplane, and this is Lillian Bland 2. And in this, again, I'm looking at her. This is a drawing made looking at that aviation notebook. It's typewriter film, carbon paper and mimeograph on paper. This is a book. I haven't finished this yet. I haven't compiled it. It's just the pages of the book. It's called Looking Up. And in this, I was fascinated that if you think about it, the early 20th century, when these people, when airplanes took to the air, people must have just been looking up and amazed at what was above them. And I just wanted to make a book about that notion of looking up. So then this is the other project I'm currently working on. It's Ports Past and Present. And this is, I'm working with the University College Cork, Aberystwyth University, the University of Wales, Trinity St David and Wexford County Council. So the Irish Sea Basin forms a distinct node of histories, economies and identities. So ports past and present considers 5 very different ports and their communities on either side of the sea. So it's Dublin Port, Rosslare, Holyhead, Fishguard and Pembroke Dock. What I'm doing for this project is I'm making a series of mimeograph postcards, 2 of each port in multiples of 50, and for each port I'm going to focus on a different aspect of their history. So the Dublin Port postcards are focused on trade and the movement of goods, Holyhead on the historic link between sea and rail travel, and Rosslare I'm looking at the seaside holiday home. And this September I'm planning to visit Pembroke Dock and Fishguard. And this is the postcards I'm making for Dublin Port. They're mimeograph postcards, and they're the same actual side of what a postcard would be. And yeah, so that's the end of my presentation. And thank you very much for listening, and also for the invitation to give the presentation.
Hi, and welcome back. And I'm pleased to welcome Julie Merriman to join us for a conversation. Hi, Julie.
Hi.
Thank you so much. I mean, it's always good to see what you've been working on. Absolutely stunning work as always, and a fantastic presentation of what you've been up to. And I have questions, of course, as you know, but also I'm going to just ask our audience as well that if you have any questions, and I already see one has popped up, by all means, please enter them using the chat or Q&A function. But before that happens, there's a couple of things I wanted to ask you about, and maybe kind of open up a little bit about your practice. And to go right back to the beginning, you talked about the binary nature of your practice, and particularly the medium of mimeographs. And yet the work also clearly makes those slippages between the original and the copy kind of visibly evident. And I wonder if you can discuss this notion of the transferred residue from one to the other and what it means for your work. And I was thinking as well with the compiler series, it also appears to kind of question the binary logic of the computing and engineering systems. So that kind of in-between liminal state, I wonder, how do you address that in your practice?
Okay, so yeah, it's really important when I'm making the work that so I don't necessarily always know that I didn't initially know that it would produce, when I started with the carbon paper, I knew that would give me a copy. But when I started with the typewriter film, I didn't know that would give me a copy. I thought originally I would pin it across the page and I would draw on top of it and it would put an image on the paper. And it was only then that I took the ribbons off and they're hanging there. And I thought, well, I was looking at them and I just put them back on and just started scribbling back over. And I was really excited when I saw, well, actually, this gives me back a negative. So it's always trial and error. It's what if I do this, what will happen? If I always try and push the materials, take them to, always trying to do that to see what else can that material give me? How else can I use it? And then with the mimeograph, obviously mimeographs are it's obviously copy. That's the whole point of it. The duplicator was developed so offices could cheaply produce copy. But again, when I'm using it, I don't necessarily always use it according to how it should be used. So even with the postcards I was making for Dublin Port, instead of making 50 postcards the same, which was my plan, I immediately, when I started making them, I realized that I was using a very old roller, and just by rolling that, making the first image, I realized that it was quite sticky and old, and it was holding on to the image. And then if I was push that back onto another piece of paper, the roller itself was giving me this other image, but I couldn't control that image. I couldn't make it land on the paper in any particular way. It was just wherever it landed. And again, that was just something, again, I quite liked. So it's constant trial and error and testing the materials all the time. And it's what really interests me. It's why I keep wanting to make another piece of work.
It definitely lends itself to a certain kind of like a happy accident, I guess, or this kind of, to make that process kind of front and center. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about this kind of sense of fragility or kind of the ephemeral nature of these kind of drawings, and the ways in which you relate this to your subject matter. So obviously, older buildings or obsolete machinery, but even I noticed that I'd never seen this before, you're drawing of eggshells as well. And it seemed to me there's kind of a marriage there of kind of, forming content?
Yeah, I mean, there's a fragility to the materials themselves, because a lot of them are like the stencils themselves, that they're very, like, if I'm using the wax Guest Ethno original stencils, you can't really buy them. Obviously you can't buy them anymore, so they're hard to source and they are very fragile. But and then with the content, well, I suppose that like when I'm looking at engineering in particular, it's heavy. It's, in particular older engineering, it's very heavy, very industrial, and you can almost hear it. So, and then with the eggshell image, that had to be fragile, because I was looking at emigration, and I was looking at fragile people, and well, not necessarily, but at the point that they were leaving, they must have felt quite fragile. It must have been very difficult. Some of them didn't come back. And so I had to use something that was, yeah. So it's the materials, I try to kind of marry them up with what the subject matter is as well, to get my message across better.
Yeah, I mean, we first kind of met quite a few years back when you were doing residency at the UCD Parody Studios. And I remember kind of talking with you about your work. And I wonder, could you expand a little bit on that whole experience and how that informed your practice? I think this was particularly related to the stuff around engineering, I think, at the time you were looking at. Yeah.
That was actually a fantastic residency, because I found myself at this university, and the residency was with architecture and engineering, so two huge departments in the university. And architecture was really interesting, because they were working on reusing buildings in Dublin City, and they were working with the McVerry Trust at that time. And so I was working with a group of students. In fact, the drawing in the Glucksman Gallery is one of the drawings I made there, and was based on one of the drawings, one of the buildings that the students were actually looking at. I think it was the old driving building in town or something. I can't remember the exact name. But and then when I got over to the engineering department in the university, like, there was so many different types of mechanical, there was electrical, there was so many different types, and I was so excited. I actually did spend a lot of time working with electrical engineering while I was there, but I also spent a lot of time in the library looking at, when you go higher up to the very top of the library, they have all these old manuals of engineering, from the engineering projects from 19th century, and absolutely fascinating and amazing, just stuff in these seriously dusty old books. But it was a brilliant residency. I had an amazing time there. Yeah.
It looked wonderful. All right. Another thing I want to ask you about was, I like the way you talked about the mimeograph in relation to kind of this 1960s counterculture movement, and these kind of, I guess, kind of propaganda kind of bits, or these kind of zines, I guess, to begin the zine.
Yeah.
You have a particular affection for this kind of, I find there's something quite interesting about kind of the practice that you have, and blueprints having this kind of speculative kind of abstract quality too, in relation to the kind of final fixed realization of that. And so they always kind of carry this kind of sense of kind of, this is the ideal, or this is kind of the promise of it. And I wonder if you relate that to this notion of mimeograph as having this connection to kind of a counterculture, or almost a revolutionary movement.
I don't think about it in that way. I mean, I started using mimeographs because, well, even a carbon paper, typewriter ribbon, and mimeograph, they're all office materials, old office materials, and that's, I suppose, where I started using the mimeograph. But yeah, the mimeograph has an amazing history. If you actually look into it, it's really interesting. And I know maybe a lot of people in Ireland perhaps are not using mimeograph, maybe Riso. There's lots of people in Ireland using Riso now, but not mimeograph. But in Europe, there's an awful lot of people. Like, I went over to Holland, I had an Arts Council bursary to explore the use of mimeograph in places like Holland and Germany, and obviously in America too, but definitely those to Holland and Germany and France. And there's a lot of people, a lot of artists using it and again, using it similar, not maybe not like, you know, aware of the 1960s and how it was used in the 70s and that kind of those groups, but using it in their own way, you know, basically using it now and to speak about things now. So it's and I kind of use I use sometimes just Mimograph, but I sometimes mix Mimograph and Rhizo together. So with any materials I have, I'm going to just really push them, play with them, see what can I do. Again, just going back to that notion of what can I make these materials do? How can they represent what I want to say? Yeah, but yeah, I'm really into the mimeograph. Like it's a fantastic medium.
I mean,
Yeah.
they're beautiful objects as well. When you showed us the kind of machinery,
and you want to hear them. I had a little video, but I couldn't quite get it. I'm not tech enough to get it into my talk, but when you actually hear the sound of it going, it's brilliant. Yeah, it's really cool. Yeah, so.
I mean, one thing I before I turn over to a couple of questions here from the audience, one thing that interests me about your work, and maybe this just reflects, you know, my own kind of position, is the way that you show them as unframed drawings on the gallery wall, that they're pinned directly to the gallery wall. And I wonder if maybe you talk a little bit about why you show work this way, why this is important to you, and what do you think that brings to the audience's encounter with the work?
Well, I think first of all, it's like, I don't even ever, when I finish a piece of work, I don't like to do anything. I don't sign it. I don't like to, because you spend so long getting that work just right that I don't want to do anything to it. And so I like to put it on the wall exactly as it was in the studio when I finished it. And I like that it is a piece of paper, and I want it to be a piece of paper. Or if it's canvas, you know, I just want them to be as I want them to be, the way I finish them, that's the way I want them to be seen. I mean, I understand sometimes if someone buys a piece of work, I'll go to the framers with them, and I don't mind that they frame it. That's fine. But when I'm initially showing my work, I like it just to be as it was when I decided it was finished, to be seen that way.
I mean, it's very effective. You talked about, you know, how you want people to kind of read these things up close. And,
yeah.
And I see that in the gallery, that people kind of, maybe they get a little bit too close for my comfort. But,
it's fine. They're much tougher than they look. Yeah. But yeah, no, it's really important to read the images as well. And they have to work from behind, obviously. So, you know, in the studio, you're constantly walking back and forth to the drawing, back, constantly like that. So they have to work in both ways, up close, but also from far back. Yeah.
I have a question here from Rebecca, who's asking, I would love to know more about your fascinating process work and who's informed and influenced you over the years. And she mentions kind of a reminder of kind of Kathy Prendergast city drawings, something we showed here in the Glucksman several years ago as well. But I wonder, yeah, who do you I guess look at? Who do you enjoy as an artist, or who has kind of led you in this particular direction throughout your career?
I do love Kathy Prendergast, like no two ways about that. I mean, I love the way William Kendridge, I mean, I love his work, but I love the way he talks about making his work. I love the way he talks about being in the studio. I think that's fantastic. He did a series of lectures, which are just, I don't know if they're so good to listen to. Like, I think there's 4 lectures in the series, and he's talking about how he makes his work, and I love that. I actually look at a lot of engineering and actual engineering and architects and engineers as well. I mean, like when I was making the work about in Dublin City Council, I really was looking at old engineering drawings, and then I was looking at what were the colors they were using, how did they make the work, and then when I was looking at stacks of drawings, some of them were on translucent paper, so I could see down through them. So I started making drawings with layers to them as well. So I'm very much influenced by the research I'm looking at. Like when I said, when I decided to make books, I looked at how Gestetner put his, you know, how he put that book, that news book that he did every year. How did he staple it? How did he close it up? How did he make that cover? And I used that methodology then. I like to use as much of the my research and to follow as close as possible, maybe to the project that I'm looking at, how to follow that in my own work, and to make it my own, but not just to look at it and say, okay, that's interesting, I'll take. Do you know what I mean? To go a little deeper. Yeah.
I mean, this relates to another question here that's been posed, which is, what is it about architecture that intrigues you?
You know, right from when I became an artist and I was in college, I studied in Falmouth School of Art down in Cornwall, and I spent that 3 years on a building site. They were building down at the docks when I was there. I initially was building sites. It was the machinery on the building sites. The every morning you'd go down there. It was something had happened, something had changed, moved. And I loved that it was just this constant source of information. So it started off by just being literally building sites, and then I started with the architecture. What I loved was the way they made their plans, the way they could put their ideas on paper, and how that looked, and the arrangement of the marks that they made on the page. And yeah, so I don't know, I'm just love architecture. Yeah.
But it's fascinating with kind of blueprints and things like that, because even, you know, even though they're kind of these abstract kind of images in a way, you know, the way you can kind of use line or these kind of delicate marks, I think they kind of suggest kind of volume or kind of mass. It's something that I find really comes across in your work. It's kind of this kind of play of kind of density and kind of sparseness, and the way that kind of suggests something almost three-dimensional.
Well, they are three-dimensional, so that's great. You know, yeah. Yeah, you just get, when you're making a drawing, I mean, it takes a great long length of time, and you just get so involved in it, and you work on, you use your instinct mostly when you're making a drawing. You just instinctively know, and it's great. It's great. It's a great feeling when you're making a drawing. I absolutely love it. Yeah, I love doing it.
Well, I can think of no better sentence to kind of end on for this talk. So I just want to say a huge thanks, Julie, for the presentation and for the discussion today, and for the audience as well for being here. And just before we go, to say that we will be back next month with the final two of the Home Artists series of talks with Martin Boyle and Tinka Beckert, as well as launching later on this month our next series around their current exhibition Graph that we've developed with the National Sculpture Factory. But Home is on until the end of October, and I encourage you all to come out and see all of the work, and especially Julie Merriman's work. Thank you again, Julie.
Great. Thank you so much.